Welcome to the Brain, Music and Learning podcast, Nella Moisseinen.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful to have you with us, and our plan is now to talk about your recent paper on choir singers.
Yes.
So why are you interested in choir singing? Is there something special about choirs?
Well, there is a lot special about choirs, but I think the most interesting thing with respect to music is that choir singing is a group activity. So in addition to having all these positive effects from music, you can get the social engagement, you can make friends and have the group around you all the time. So I think in terms of enhancing well-being, choir singing might have a very, very good chances of improving our well-being.
Some people who are choir singers, they say that my choir is the group of people who helps me most, even though I never talk about my problems with them. So how is that possible?
That's a very good question. I've heard the same thing, but I suppose that, well, in choirs you just accidentally exchange information about each other's lives and you will actually develop friendships even though not noticing.
Yeah, and it's a different kind of friendship.
It is. And many people who start in a choir end up staying there for decades even.
Yes, with the same people.
Yes.
So the method that you are using in your studies is actually looking at the white matter in the brain.
Yes, so we were interested in the connections between brain areas, so white matter. And more specifically, we were looking into the structural integrity of the white matter. So well, in technical terms, you could talk about how the water molecules are moving in the brain tissue, but in practice it means that if the white matter is very, very healthy, it has high integrity, then it's usually a good thing.
And that's related also to the amount of myelin. So the myelin is something that is restricting the water molecules, isn't it?
Yes, myelin is a very key factor in white matter, and also I'm interested in aging, so it's a typical thing to see that as we grow older we get in many ways we get reductions in the structural integrity of white matter, not just necessarily in myelin but also you can use very, very many measures and see the same thing.
So that's generally known about brain aging, that you lose some of the myelin, you lose some of the connections in the white matter, and that's like what happens to our brains when we grow older. And the opposite, of course, when we are young. So during childhood, the white matter becomes more clear, more connections, faster connections, more myelin, and so on. And then, unfortunately, it's reversed in aging.
Yes, but an interesting thing that not very many people seem to know is that the brain aging processes, including some of the changes that we see in white matter, don't begin in, say, early adulthood, but actually, if you think about some structural measures of the brain, you can see the highest values in early childhood, like on 2-year-olds or 6-year-olds. So actually some of the age effects are taking place for most of our lives, not just in late life.
Yeah, so aging is a really complex phenomenon. On some aspects we are still growing and
Yes.
becoming like more adults,
Yes.
while other aspects have turned already towards aging.
Yes.
One very interesting topic here is the sense of smell. So our sense of smell is very, very good when we are babies, and then it declines for the rest of our lives. So we need it when we are babies, and we need to recognize who is mom and who is not.
Yeah. That's very true, and I think that's a perfect example about how brain is actually attempting to be most effective to the present needs. So I think one reason why we start losing white matter, for instance, at a relatively early age is that the brain is not attempting to be large and impressive. It's attempting to be economic and flexible and actually answer to the needs of the daily life of that person. So that's a really good example of that too.
So that's very relieving. We don't have to be afraid of aging. It's just making our brain more economical.
Yes, precisely. That's how I see aging.
Yes. And you noticed effects of aging on the white matter in the choir singers.
Yes. So in our study, we had a fairly large sample. We had about 100 participants. The youngest were in their early 20s and oldest ones were in their late 80s. And all ages represented roughly equally across that age range. And we were interested in seeing how the lifetime duration of choir singing experience might show in the white matter structure. And we were doing this connectometry, which essentially means that we were studying, well, first of all, where the tracts are, but also we wanted to know how healthy the brain structure is along those tracts. And so we did first a very large analysis on the whole sample. For that we actually got only 95 participants because we had some technical issues at the lab, but 95 is still fairly representative, so far so good. But we found actually quite extensive enhancements in white matter microstructure related to the choir singing experience. So the more the person had, or the longer the person had been in choir actively, singing at least a few hours a week, the more extensive enhancements we were able to see, which was really, well, a nice result, but also maybe a bit surprising because, well, there haven't been many studies on this topic for any musical hobby before, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. I thought that, well, singing is very closely associated with speech, so probably we would see something on the speech pathways, for instance, but the fact that we actually saw very large enhancements in not only the language structures, but also pathways that are associated with motor production and some other motor functions, more generally also emotion processing, memory, and general cognition. So it was just a colorful rainbow that appeared on the computer screen.
Lots of areas in the white matter that are affected by the choir singing. Very often singing is not in the focus of these music neuroscience studies, but it's much more typical to study people playing a musical instrument. And there, when you look at motor functions, you might think about the actual process of playing the musical instrument. But here, all of this motor activity is kind of hidden. Of course, you need motor activity to produce the sound in the choir, but it's not like you are not using your hands or feet specifically, but you are using your organs that we don't really see inside your lungs and larynx and all of those parts. So you still see the effects on the motor system. So were you surprised about that?
At first, yes. But then I started thinking about singing as a motor activity. I'm not a singer myself, but I have sung in a choir, and I just suddenly remembered that, okay, our instructor actually was very precise about our posture. So when you sing, you don't just sit like in any fashion. You actually have to stand. You have to have a very nice posture. You have to have your chin in a particular angle, your tongue nicely out, not in your throat, and also just focus on these very many postural control things. So I think that's actually related to that. And then I started talking about this with persons who have been doing more research on singing and also people who are singers, and they all agreed, yes, that makes perfect sense. So that's our theory for now.
Yeah, so it's more holistic motor activity probably than playing a musical instrument.
Yes, well, at least in terms of controlling your own body, you need a lot. Of course, and playing any instrument would require a lot of motor control, but this was an interesting finding.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And then you were able to find differences in the connection between the choir singing activity and the white matter depending on the age group.
Yes. So after we had seen these very extensive enhancements across the whole age range, we were of course interested in the aging question. Do we see different effects depending on how old the participants are? So we replicated the same analysis exactly for each age group. So we had young adults who were from their early 20s until late 30s, then middle-aged from early 40s to late 50s, and then 60 and above, whom we called the older adults. And the first interesting finding was that actually the extensive effects, although they came from the whole sample, they were largely driven by the young participants. And first I was very puzzled about this, but again, then I started thinking about this. Okay, if you think about how music is known to affect brain function, for instance, how it's known to activate the brain, these results would make sense in terms of specialization. So the more we practice something, the more our brain is adapting to something. And this is also related to this answering to the needs of the daily life that we were talking about before. So the young participants who have been actually singing, some of them have been singing for most of their lives. So they have been in quite intensive musical training since childhood or adolescence. And so the reason why we saw this is probably that their brains have been in a very plastic stage. So when we grow up, our brains are very, very hard trying to find the right connections, the best solutions to serve our lives. And as we grow older, our brains are more or less happy with the main lines that there already exist, but they may adapt to some more specific things in a less extensive manner. So this is probably the reason why we saw the extensive effects mainly in the young participants. We did find something that was systematic across all the age groups. So that was corpus callosum. That is a structure that is connecting our brain hemispheres to one another. So the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And I thought that was interesting because one very crucial thing about music is that it not only activates the brain very extensively, but it also activates both hemispheres very extensively. And sometimes we have compared music to language, for example, which has some shared neural substrates, but is more focused on the left hemisphere. So the fact that we saw these enhancements in the corpus callosum, regardless of the participant's age, was really interesting, at least in my view. But the final thing that I think is the best part about the paper was that in the older participants, we saw selective enhancements in the fornix. Fornix is like a C-shaped structure deep in the brain. It connects to the hippocampus, which is known to support memory functions, for instance. And we know from previous studies that when we see disruptions of fornix integrity, for instance, then we often see first signs of memory decline at the same time. And given that music hobbies are known to support memory function also at older age, and there are also some studies that suggest that music could be used to reduce dementia risk, it's really interesting to see that these participants who had been singing for a long time actually had an enhanced integrity of their fornix. So that would support this finding.
So this is actually revealing the mechanism of how musical hobbies might help people retain their memory functions in old age.
Yes, it certainly gives us an idea what might be the mechanism behind it. Of course, we would need still a study that would actually establish the connection between this fornix integrity and memory function, or how the maintained integrity is actually related to maintained memory function. We didn't have behavioral data here in this paper, so it doesn't show the direct connection, but it's a very promising candidate for this.
So could it mean that the hippocampus is more active and then is able to communicate better with the more better phonics, or how would you explain it in layperson's terms?
That's one theory that has been in the air. So there are 2 other studies in music that have had a similar finding. There was one study with piano playing. It was a randomized controlled trial, so there were groups that were compared and randomized. First randomized into groups and then compared. So one was playing a piano and the other one was not. In a study like that, the researchers found also enhancements in the phonics. And another one was with dancing. So in those papers, the authors were speculating that this could be the idea behind this, but I'm really looking forward to seeing more studies on this topic, because now we have 3 quite different musical activities, 3 quite different sets of methods that were used. So it's interesting that we get the same result, but in order to establish the background, we would probably need a more systematic account.
But if it is true, so then it would mean that many different types of musical activities would actually be helpful in that age group of 60 plus.
Yeah, that's the idea.
That sounds great. What do you answer to those people who would say that, you are just looking at the effects of education or socioeconomic status or something like that, because going to a choir is very rare and very expensive and so on. So you are only seeing these effects of these other things.
So is the question that choir is something that is only available to those with a higher socioeconomic status?
Yes, and then you would just have this all of these results would actually be only about education level or something like that.
Yes, that's a very relevant question, and that's the reason why we actually controlled for the effects of education and age and also other musical hobbies. So we removed the effects of these factors from the results, and that actually gave us a very nice set of results. So I think in aging studies it's always very important to consider not only the effects of age but also education, because education is very strongly associated to the aging effects that we usually see. But regarding choir singing more generally, I think, well, it's not a very expensive hobby necessarily. There are many free choirs, but I think the problem with choir singing, if I was to suggest that this is something that everybody should do, is that it's not necessarily very attractive hobby for men, at least not all people. I have done it and I really enjoyed it, but I think that some people may have this idea that choir singing is boring in a way, but well, I tell everybody to go to choir, just give it a try, because there are many different kinds of choirs. There are very peaceful meditation choirs, there are show choirs, there are classical choirs, everything. So I'm sure there would be a choir for everybody.
And at least in Helsinki there is a choir for people who can't sing.
Yes.
So
yes.
You can't even say that
Yes.
I'm not able to go to a choir because I can't sing. There's one for that too.
That is true, and there's a choir. One of my favorite choirs of all time is mieskuorohuutajat, so men who only shout. So they never sing, but they actually just shout together.
And that's like a rhythmical shouting thing that they have like a show of that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So you can have very different types of choirs.
Yes.
I still want to ask one more thing. What do you think about the importance of choirs in education in schools?
In schools, that's a very interesting question. Well, starting from a personal perspective again, well, for me, the best choir experiences were actually in school. Choir is something that anyone can join when they're in school. Well, of course, there might be some choirs that have like an entrance exam or something that are not open to everybody. But at least in my case, I found that choir was a place where everybody could be very like equal. So you didn't need to be somebody, you didn't need to have any specific skills or features or anything. You didn't have to know anything about music really to join the choir, and that was some place where everybody would do something together. So it's a group activity where you don't need to worry about how other people see you, because you're just doing the same thing together. So you have a common goal and you have to go towards that. So that's something that I think is very valuable in a school environment.
Yes, so if there is somebody listening to this podcast and thinking about should our school have a choir, the answer is yes.
Yes,
and preferably a choir without an entrance exam, something where everybody can come and have fun together and maybe prepare a show for the others.
Yes, and where, well, our music teacher always allowed us to make wishes on which pieces of music we would sing together, and we did those pieces, and that was just amazing.
Yeah, so joining a choir at a young age is beneficial for your brain, but it's then also maybe carrying over to being able to join a choir also at an older age, which might be even more important.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much for participating, Nella.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.